Tonight, we will tell you the story of a day that shaped an empire, a day in the life of a Byzantine emperor. You will discover what it truly meant to be the living embodiment of a vast ancient realm, a successor to Roman power and a guardian of Orthodox faith. You will walk through the gilded halls of the great palace, witness the silent rituals that affirmed his sacred role, observe the complex dance of diplomacy and military strategy, and understand the immense burden of ruling an empire that stretched across continents. This is a chronicle of events, an immersion into the very heart of Byzantine authority, a journey through the moments that defined the man who stood at the center of the world. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to the channel. New sleep stories are released here every day. All right, find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let your body sink into the quiet comfort. Our story begins in Constantinople, the new Rome, a city of domes and distant whispers, long before the sun's first rays touched the golden mosaics of the great palace, where the emperor, a man both mortal and divine, still slept. Today I will tell you a story more than 1,000 years old, a story of a man whose life was inextricably linked with the fate of a great empire. You will learn what it means to be a Byzantine emperor, how his day unfolded, filled with rituals, power, and immense responsibility. We will begin in the earliest hours of the morning when the city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, still sleeps under a blanket of stars, and only the first glimmers of dawn touch the golden domes of the great palace. The first, barely perceptible light, like the breath of a new day, began to filter through the high windows of the imperial chambers. It was not the harsh strike of the sun, but a soft, almost delicate awakening of the world. In Constantinople, a city that for centuries had served as the center of the Christian East and the heir to the Roman Empire, the dawn was always an event. But within the walls of the great palace it arrived with a special, almost sacred silence. This enormous complex of buildings, sprawling across the southeastern tip of Constantinople by the Sea of Marmara, was not merely a residence, it was the heart of the empire, a symbol of its might and its ceaseless vigilance. Here, behind massive walls and under the watchful eye of the guard, a unique atmosphere reigned, saturated with history, intrigue, and age-old tradition. In the deepest recesses of this majestic labyrinth, in his private, carefully guarded chambers, the emperor awoke. His awakening was a solitary one. There were no loud cries of servants, no bustle or hasty preparations. Only the quiet rustle of silk blankets, only the barely audible creak of wooden beams as he slowly rose from his bed. He was not just a man waking to a new day. He was a sovereign whose every movement, every breath, every glance held meaning for millions of people. Upon him lay the weight of the entire state, its well-being, its protection, its future. In these first few moments, while the world still slumbered, the emperor was alone with his thoughts, with his responsibility. It was a moment of deep, almost sacred reflection, as the man prepared to take upon himself the burden of the empire. His gaze, still slightly hazed with sleep, swept over the familiar yet always impressive furnishings of his room. Then it settled on the most important symbol of his power, lying on a low table or perhaps already neatly laid out on a special chair by his personal chamberlain, who waited unseen for his moment behind the door. This was the imperial mantle, woven from the most expensive and rare material, imperial purple. The purple in question was no mere colour. It was Tyrian purple, a dye extracted from a special species of sea snails called murex, found in the eastern Mediterranean, particularly off the coast of Phoenicia. The process of its production was incredibly laborious and required an enormous number of mollusks. Up to 10,000 snails were needed to produce a single gram of dye. This made purple so expensive that its value exceeded that of gold. In Byzantium, the use of this colour was strictly regulated. Only the emperor and members of his family had the right to wear garments dyed in this deep, reddish-violet hue. It was an unwritten law, a custom observed for centuries, which underscored the exceptional status of the emperor, his divine election, and his indisputable power. When the emperor took this mantle in his hands, he felt not only the weight of the fabric, but the full symbolic power it carried. It was not merely a garment, it was a sacred attribute passed down from generation to generation, linking him to the great Roman emperors whose traditions he continued, and to God himself, whose vicar on earth he was considered to be. Putting on the purple, he did not simply dress, he performed a ritual, transforming from a man into a divine ruler. Every thread, every shade of purple was a reminder of his unique role, of his responsibility to his people, to the church, to history. It was a vestment that demanded not only strength, but wisdom, not only power, but profound faith. In these morning hours, before his chamberlains and eunuchs entered the chambers to begin the complex ritual of dressing, the emperor could once more feel the full depth of his position. The purple was not only a symbol of privilege, but a constant reminder that he did not belong to himself. His life, his time, his thoughts, all were dedicated to the empire. This moment of solitude before the sacred mantle was his personal prelude to the new day, a day that would be filled with ceremonies, decisions, and unceasing care for the fate of Byzantium. He was preparing to appear before the world not just as a man, but as the living embodiment of a 1,000-year-old empire, whose destiny rested upon his shoulders. With the imperial purple now settled upon your shoulders, a garment heavy with history and profound symbolism, you moved from the private chambers towards the heart of your personal devotion, the small, hallowed space of the imperial chapel. This was not a grand basilica, but an intimate sanctuary nestled within the vast labyrinth of the great palace, a fortress of stone and silence that had stood for centuries on the shores of the Bosphorus, the narrow strait connecting the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara, a vital artery for trade and defence. The passage was brief, illuminated by the faint glow of early morning, the air still cool and still. Only a few trusted eunuchs, silent and unobtrusive, accompanied you, their presence a testament to the absolute need for privacy in these sacred moments. They understood this was a time for communion, a solitary act of profound significance before the demands of the day began to press. As you stepped into the chapel, the scent of aged beeswax and faint incense lingering from evening vespers embraced you. The space was small, yet its walls were rich with ancient icons, their faces painted in sombre, truly reverent hues, framed by intricate gold leaf. These were not mere artworks. They were windows to the divine, each a direct conduit to the saints and to God himself. The soft, flickering light from a handful of oil lamps cast long dancing shadows, making the figures on the panels seem to stir with an inner life. Before the altar, a single ornate gospel book lay open, its pages inscribed with words of eternal truth, words that had guided emperors and commoners alike for 1,000 years. You knelt not on a cushion of velvet, but directly on the cold, polished marble floor, a deliberate act of humility before the Almighty. This was the moment when the earthly weight of the empire, the incessant clamour of politics and power, momentarily receded. Here you were not the emperor of the Romans, the Basileus, the supreme ruler of the Byzantine Empire, the successor to the Caesars and the defender of Orthodox Christianity. Here you were simply a man, a servant kneeling before his Creator, seeking guidance, strength, and mercy. Your prayers were not whispered pleas for personal comfort or worldly success. They were earnest petitions for the well-being of the vast realm entrusted to your care. You prayed for the prosperity of Constantinople, the new Rome, the magnificent capital city that stood as a beacon of civilization. You prayed for the wisdom to discern truth from deception, for the courage to make difficult decisions, for the foresight to anticipate threats lurking on distant horizons. You prayed for the soldiers guarding the empire's extensive borders, from the harsh deserts of the east to the rugged mountains of the Balkans, for the sailors navigating the treacherous seas, for the farmers tilling the fertile lands, for every man, woman, and child under your dominion. This daily ritual was far more than a personal act of piety. It was the very bedrock upon which your divine right to rule was founded and continually reinforced. In Byzantium, the emperor was not merely a secular leader. He was considered God's chosen representative on earth, an almost sacred figure, a living icon of divine order. His authority was believed to flow directly from God, a sacred mandate that elevated him above all other earthly rulers. Every genuflection, every murmured prayer, every moment spent in silent contemplation before the icons served to reaffirm this profound connection. It was a visible, tangible declaration that your power was not seized by force or inherited by chance, but divinely ordained. This belief permeated every layer of Byzantine society, from the highest court official to the humblest peasant. It was taught in churches, inscribed in legal texts, depicted in mosaics, and echoed in the hymns sung throughout the empire. The stability and legitimacy of your rule, and by extension, the very fabric of the empire, depended on this sacred understanding. Through these morning prayers, you sought not only God's blessing, but also his partnership in the immense task of governing. The weight of imperial responsibility, which felt so palpable in the silence of your awakening, was now shared, at least symbolically, with the divine. You asked for protection from internal dissent and external aggression, for the strength to withstand the relentless pressures that sought to undermine your authority. You envisioned the vastness of your empire, a mosaic of diverse peoples and cultures, all bound together under the banner of Christ and the imperial eagle. Your prayers were a silent vow to uphold justice, to protect the innocent, and to defend the faith, embodying the very ideals of the Christian emperor. This quiet communion with the divine prepared you, not just mentally or emotionally, but spiritually, for the day ahead, for the endless stream of decisions that would shape the destiny of millions. It was a moment of profound introspection and immense spiritual renewal, a vital wellspring of strength from which you drew the resolve to face whatever challenges that the new day would inevitably bring. The air in the chapel, though still cool, now felt charged with purpose, a silent energy that would carry you forward. Once the solemnity of prayer concluded, the emperor, still cloaked in the quiet dignity of his devotion, transitioned from the sacred solitude of his private chapel to the more immediate yet equally hushed chambers where the mundane but no less critical affairs of the empire awaited his attention. The very air in the palace seemed to shift, from the profound stillness of spiritual communion to the subtle, almost imperceptible hum of an awakening administration. It was in these moments, before the full clamour of the court began to resonate through the vast halls, that the true pulse of the sprawling empire first reached his ears, filtered through the carefully chosen voices of those he most trusted and relied upon, his eunuchs and chamberlains. These individuals were far more than mere servants or personal attendants. They constituted the emperor's inner circle, his most reliable eyes and ears, and his closest confidants in a world perpetually teeming with ambition, factionalism, and intrigue. The eunuchs, often individuals of immense practical power, despite their castrated status, held pivotal administrative positions within the imperial household. They meticulously managed the intricate daily finances of the palace, meticulously oversaw its vast domestic operations, and critically acted as indispensable intermediaries, bridging the gap between the emperor's secluded majesty and the often chaotic realities of the outside world. Their loyalty, frequently guaranteed by their unique position, being outside the traditional power structures and familial loyalties of the great noble houses, was not merely beneficial, but utterly indispensable to the stability of the throne. The chamberlains, too, were elevated beyond simple attendants. They served as vigilant guardians of the imperial person, meticulously controlled access to the emperor, and acted as silent, astute observers, noting every subtle nuance and shift in allegiance within the labyrinthine palace walls. Their reports, always delivered in low, respectful tones, were the foundational layer of intelligence that would, in turn, decisively shape the emperor's understanding and response to the demands of the nascent day. They would approach him with a deferential bow, their movements smooth, precise, and deeply practiced, carrying carefully prepared parchment scrolls and whispering concise summaries of overnight events and recent developments. These initial briefings were a complex mosaic of information, each piece vital to the grand picture. Urgent dispatches from the distant, often turbulent frontiers, detailing the latest skirmishes with formidable nomadic tribes, the strategic movements of rival empires, or the fragile state of newly negotiated truces. Precise reports from the bustling, vibrant markets of Constantinople, hinting at potential unrest among the common people due to rising prices or sudden fluctuations in vital trade routes. And often subtle whispers from the city's myriad districts, revealing the prevailing mood of the populace, the latest scandalous gossip circulating among the aristocracy, or the subtle underlying currents of political intrigue that ebbed and flowed within the capital's elite circles. Sometimes there were truly urgent messages, sealed with the distinctive insignia of a distant embattled general or a newly appointed provincial governor, each demanding immediate imperial decree and decisive action. At other times, the news was more mundane, yet equally essential, as a steady, continuous flow of administrative updates concerning the progress of tax collections, the status of ongoing public works projects, or even the reported health of prominent citizens whose influence could sway public opinion. The emperor would listen with an intensity that belied his calm demeanour, his expression often unreadable, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the immediate present, as if his keen mind was already processing the multifaceted implications of each individual piece of information. He rarely interrupted, allowing the uninterrupted flow of intelligence to wash over him, meticulously sifting through the myriad details, discerning hidden patterns, and identifying both potential threats that required preemptive action and strategic opportunities that could be seized. His mind, honed by decades of leadership and an unparalleled understanding of his vast realm, worked with remarkable speed, effortlessly connecting disparate facts, anticipating complex reactions from both allies and adversaries, and carefully weighing the far-reaching consequences of every potential decision. This was not a time for grand pronouncements, public displays of authority, or theatrical gestures. It was, instead, a profoundly vital period of quiet absorption, of deep internal strategizing, and of the silent, weighty burden of imperial responsibility. Based on these initial comprehensive reports, the emperor began the subtle yet profoundly impactful task of shaping his day's agenda. He would nod almost imperceptibly, or offer a brief, resonant word, a concise directive signaling which issues required his immediate, undivided attention, which officials needed to be summoned to the Great Palace for further consultation, and which imperial decrees might need to be drafted with utmost urgency. Perhaps a particularly severe border skirmish demanded a swift and decisive military response, necessitating an immediate meeting with his most trusted generals and strategists, or a persistent report of local discontent, perhaps fueled by a poor harvest or an unpopular edict, might prompt a thorough review of recent tax policies or provincial administration. The unexpected illness or even the reported health of a key official could mean a crucial reassessment of administrative appointments or the delicate balance of power within the court. Each piece of news, no matter how seemingly small or insignificant in isolation, could, in the emperor's discerning hands, trigger a cascading series of decisions that would ripple outward, affecting the lives and livelihoods of millions across the vast, intricate expanse of the Byzantine Empire. The chamberlains would then silently withdraw, their movements as precise as their earlier reports, relaying the emperor's unspoken yet entirely clear directives. This set in motion the intricate, well-oiled machinery of imperial governance, a complex system that had been refined over centuries. The early morning, therefore, became a powerful crucible where raw, unfiltered information was meticulously transformed into actionable, far-reaching policy, where the abstract, immense weight of an entire empire was distilled into concrete, manageable tasks. It was a profound testament to the emperor's disciplined, almost ascetic approach to rule, an unwavering affirmation that even the most divinely appointed leader, whose authority was believed to emanate directly from God, relied fundamentally on meticulous intelligence gathering, careful deliberation, and the prudent exercise of his immense power. The quiet efficiency and almost ritualistic nature of these early hours powerfully underscored the Byzantines' enduring belief in order, foresight, and the centralized, unassailable authority of their sacred emperor, whose every decision, from the smallest administrative detail concerning palace logistics to the grandest military campaign launched against a distant foe, was meticulously rooted in this initial, intimate exchange of vital information. The stage was now set not merely for a public performance of imperial power, but for the intricate, ceaseless dance of power, responsibility, and unwavering vigilance that defined a day in the life of the Byzantine ruler. The emperor, having absorbed the crucial, comprehensive intelligence from his trusted eunuchs, now prepared to transition to a more public facet of his demanding daily duties. He moved from the hushed privacy of his personal apartments, where the air was still and thick with the weight of state secrets, into the magnificent imperial vestibule. This grand antechamber served as a crucial bridge, a transitional space between the secluded imperial core and the bustling outer palace, a realm where the ordinary and the extraordinary briefly converged. The very architecture of the vestibule exuded an aura of sacred authority. Its towering walls were adorned with intricate mosaics depicting triumphant military victories, the solemn coronation of past emperors, and profound Christian symbols, reminding all who entered of the empire's divine mandate. The polished marble floors, meticulously maintained, gleamed under the soft light, filtering through high arched windows, reflecting the reverent silence of those assembled. Here the air was subtly different. A faint hint of exotic perfumes worn by high-ranking courtiers mingled with the lingering, almost ethereal aroma of incense carried from earlier morning rites performed in a nearby private chapel. The faint murmur of distant city life, usually muted within the palace walls, seemed to reach this space, a constant reminder of the vibrant capital outside. This vestibule was precisely where the first wave of petitioners gathered, individuals who, through various carefully navigated channels, had managed to secure the rare and deeply coveted privilege of presenting their pleas directly to the emperor himself. These petitioners were predominantly the humble, the aggrieved, and the desperately hopeful, drawn from all corners of the vast empire. Their concerns differed significantly from those of the powerful generals or cunning ministers who would hold sway in later councils. One might be a provincial merchant, his face lined with worry, seeking redress for an unjustly levied tax that threatened to ruin his livelihood. Another, a frail widow, her eyes red-rimmed, imploring imperial intervention against a predatory, corrupt local official who had seized her property. A learned monk might present a complex theological dispute that had fractured his monastery, seeking the emperor's ultimate arbitration. Or a common citizen, burdened by a harsh and seemingly unfair judgment from a lower court, might appeal for imperial mercy. Each individual carried a carefully prepared scroll, often tied with a simple but neat ribbon, containing their meticulously drafted written request, a tangible symbol of their fervent hopes. Their faces, etched with a visible mixture of apprehension and desperate, unyielding hope, were invariably turned towards the ornate doorway through which the emperor would soon emerge. As he entered the vestibule, a profound and immediate wave of respectful, almost breathless silence fell over the assembled group. His very presence commanded an instinctive reverence, a silent, deeply ingrained acknowledgement of the immense, almost incomprehensible power he wielded. He moved with a measured, deliberate pace, his imperial robes, a rich, deep purple chlamys, the colour reserved exclusively for the emperor, intricately embroidered with golden eagles and precious jewels, rustling softly with each step, a gentle, rhythmic sound in the stillness. His gaze, keen and accustomed to discerning truth from falsehood, swept over the waiting faces, lingering for a moment on each, a silent assessment. This interaction embodied a fundamental and deeply ingrained aspect of Byzantine governance, holding a significance that went far beyond mere superficial formality or a simple symbolic gesture. The emperor was universally seen as God's chosen representative on earth, embodying both sacred authority and secular rule. To deny his people direct access, even for a brief, fleeting moment, would have been to fundamentally undermine this sacred and indispensable connection between ruler and ruled, risking discontent and even rebellion. He would then approach the first petitioner, perhaps an elderly man, his hands clasped so nervously that his knuckles were white, his eyes cast down in profound humility and deference. The emperor would listen intently, his expression grave yet attentive, as the man, often trembling slightly with emotion and the weight of the moment, recounted his grievance in a low, earnest voice. No matter how mundane or extraordinarily complex the issue, the emperor gave each plea his full, undivided attention, a demonstration of his profound commitment to justice. He understood with a clarity born of experience that for these individuals, this personal audience was often their absolute last resort, their final, desperate hope for impartial justice in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. He might ask a precise, clarifying question, his voice calm, authoritative, and resonating with quiet power, effortlessly cutting through any unnecessary embellishment or emotional excess. Sometimes he would simply nod slowly, indicating that he had heard and understood the core of the plea, passing the petition to a waiting scribal secretary or a trusted high-ranking official for meticulous further review and appropriate action. Other times, a quick, decisive word, a single imperial decree from his lips could resolve a matter on the spot, sending a palpable ripple of profound relief or renewed fervent hope through the petitioner and the entire assembled crowd. This meticulously observed ritual, repeated with unwavering consistency day after day, year after year, served multiple crucial purposes within the intricate machinery of the empire. For the petitioners, it offered a tangible, direct connection to the awe-inspiring imperial authority, a profound reassurance that their distant ruler was indeed accessible and genuinely concerned with their personal welfare and the daily struggles of their lives. For the emperor himself, it provided an invaluable, direct conduit to the very pulse of his vast and diverse empire, allowing him to immediately gauge the real-world effectiveness of his sprawling administration, to swiftly identify potential abuses of power by local magnates or officials, and to hear the unvarnished truth that might otherwise be meticulously filtered, deliberately suppressed or distorted by his inner circle and the bureaucratic layers beneath him. It was a delicate but essential balance, maintaining the mystique and unquestionable aura of divine authority, while simultaneously demonstrating a genuine empathetic engagement with the daily struggles and aspirations of his people. The murmurs of profound gratitude and the quiet, reverent bows that sometimes followed his pronouncements were a powerful testament to his immense temporal power, alongside the profound psychological and spiritual impact of his personal attention, a direct link to the divine. Each interaction, however brief, meticulously reinforced the image of the emperor as the ultimate arbiter of justice, the vigilant shepherd of his vast Christian flock, tirelessly ensuring the stability, harmony, and enduring prosperity of the Christian Roman Empire. This early morning engagement, though often slow, methodical, and deliberate in its execution, was a foundational cornerstone of his protracted rule, a vital demonstration that even in the most sprawling, bureaucratic, and ancient of empires, the voice of the humblest subject could, with divine grace and imperial benevolence, reach the attentive ear of the emperor himself, a beacon of hope in a complex world. The emperor, having concluded the morning's petitions, now moved deeper into the heart of the great palace, towards a chamber where the very pulse of the empire could be felt, the Magnora. This was no mere room. It was a grand hall, a testament to Byzantine ingenuity and imperial power, designed not only for deliberation, but also to awe and impress. Its soaring ceilings were adorned with intricate mosaics depicting Christ Pantocrator, saints, and scenes of imperial triumph, each tessera gleaming with quiet brilliance. The walls were clad in richly veined marble, reflecting the soft glow of oil lamps and the muted light filtering through high windows. The air itself seemed to carry the weight of centuries of decisions made within these very confines, a faint scent of polished wood, ancient parchment, and perhaps the lingering trace of incense from earlier ceremonies. As you entered, you would notice the imposing imperial throne, often elevated, its form radiating authority. Before it, arranged in a semicircle, stood the empire's most powerful men, the logothetes, each responsible for a vital department of state, their faces etched with the burdens of their offices. There was the logothete of the Drome, overseeing foreign affairs, and the imperial post, a network of communication vital for controlling such a vast territory. Beside him, the logothete of the Genicon, the general minister of finance holding the purse strings of the entire empire, his gaze often fixed on the detailed ledgers before him. Then came the logothete of the Stratioticon, the minister of the army, whose strategic insights were crucial for the empire's defense and expansion. The questor of the sacred palace, responsible for justice and the drafting of imperial laws, stood with a stack of scrolls, while the praetorian prefect of the city, the chief administrator of Constantinople itself, awaited his turn to present municipal concerns. These were the pillars of the Byzantine state, men chosen for their intellect, loyalty, and administrative prowess, gathered here to advise and execute the emperor's will. The council began not with boisterous debate, but with a solemn quietude. Each official, in turn, presented his reports. The logothete of the Drome might speak of recent diplomatic exchanges with the Bulgars or the Abbasid Caliphate, detailing the latest intelligence from the borders, perhaps a new treaty proposal or a potential threat. He would outline the responses received from distant envoys, the shifting alliances, and the delicate balance of power that had to be maintained through careful negotiation and calculated displays of strength. His words would paint a picture of the external world, its complexities and dangers, and the constant vigilance required to protect the empire's interests. Following him, the logothete of the Genicon would present the financial state of the empire. He would detail the revenues from various provinces, the expenditures on military campaigns, public works, and the imperial court itself. You would hear figures on the collection of taxes, the reserves in the imperial treasury, and proposals for new fiscal policies designed to ensure stability and prosperity. His report was often the most sober, dealing with the tangible realities of wealth and scarcity, and the need for prudent management to sustain the vast imperial machinery. The logothete of the Stratioticon would then outline military affairs. He would describe troop deployments in various themes, the military districts that formed the backbone of Byzantine defence. He might discuss the readiness of the fleet, the provisioning of garrisons, or the progress of a recent recruitment drive. His voice would carry the gravitas of command, discussing the strategic implications of movements along the Danube or in Anatolia, the perennial struggles against raiding parties, and the constant need for a strong, well-equipped army to project imperial power and deter aggression. The quaestor would then address matters of law and justice. He would present proposed new decrees, perhaps amendments to existing legal codes, or reports on significant judicial cases that had reached the highest levels of appeal. His explanations would be meticulous, detailing the implications of each legal change for the lives of ordinary citizens, ensuring that the empire's complex legal system remained both just and effective. His role was to uphold the rule of law, a cornerstone of Byzantine civilization. Finally, the Praetorian prefect would bring forth the concerns of the capital, Constantinople. He might report on the state of the city's aqueducts and granaries, the maintenance of its formidable walls, or issues of public order. His insights were vital for the smooth functioning of the empire's heart, a bustling metropolis of over 500,000 souls, a centre of trade, culture and power. Throughout these presentations, the emperor listened intently, his expression betraying little emotion, yet his eyes missed nothing. He would occasionally interject with precise questions, probing for details, challenging assumptions, or seeking clarification on a particular point. His questions were sharp, revealing a deep understanding of every aspect of his domain, from the grandest military strategy to the minutiae of provincial administration. He was not merely a figurehead, he was the ultimate arbiter, the living embodiment of the empire's authority. Upon hearing all reports, the emperor would weigh the arguments, sometimes inviting brief, respectful debate among his advisers, allowing them to offer their perspectives. But the final decision always rested with him alone. With a nod or a concise command, he would approve a new law, sanction an appointment, allocate funds for a distant campaign, or issue a directive to strengthen a frontier outpost. Each decision, carefully considered, rippled outward, affecting the lives of millions across the sprawling territories of the Roman Empire, as it was still known to its people. The atmosphere in the Magnora was one of profound seriousness. There was no room for frivolity or personal agendas. The stakes were too high. The stability of the empire, its prosperity, and its very survival often hinged on the wisdom and foresight exercised within this chamber. The emperor's presence commanded absolute deference, but it was a deference born not just of fear, but of a genuine respect for the immense burden he carried and the divine mandate he embodied. The council was a symphony of power, knowledge, and responsibility, played out daily to ensure the continued glory of Byzantium. With the conclusion of this session, the emperor had shaped the legislative and administrative course for the day, preparing to address the next set of challenges awaiting him. After the main reports in the Magnora had been heard and decisions on civil and financial matters made, most of the officials and dignitaries would leave the hall. Only those whose service concerned the defence and security of the state remained. The emperor, as if switching from one state mechanism to another, turned to the no less important aspect of his rule, protecting the borders and maintaining a peace constantly challenged by numerous enemies. The emperor did not leave the Magnora, but the atmosphere in the hall changed. The tables, previously laden with scrolls reporting on tax revenues and trade routes, were now cleared, and on them were unrolled maps, meticulously drawn and coloured, marking fortresses, mountain passes, and river valleys. Here gathered his highest military commanders, the domestic of the schools, commander of the Imperial Guard, and de facto commander-in-chief of the field army, the Drungarius of the fleet, responsible for naval forces and maritime patrols, and the strategoi of the themes, the military districts who had arrived from the border regions. Their faces were weathered, their movements precise, betraying men accustomed to campaign life and the perils of constant warfare. The emperor, without unnecessary words, would point to the map. His finger would glide along the bends of the Danube, along the impassable Caucasus Mountains, across the desert expanses of Syria and the fertile valleys of Italy, touching each contested or vulnerable point. The first reports concerned the eastern borders, where the pressure from Saracen emirates and a resurgent Persia was constantly felt. The generals would describe the latest clashes, losses, successes, and failures. You would learn of nomadic raids attempting to breach the fortified lines, of patrol skirmishes, and the condition of border garrisons. Every fort, every road, every water source was of decisive importance for defence. Next, the situation in the Balkans was discussed, where Bulgar tribes and other peoples, driven by ambition or need, constantly threatened the northern provinces. Information was reported on troop movements, the construction of new fortifications, and diplomatic attempts to contain aggression. You would hear of the difficulties in supplying armies in remote areas, the need to maintain troop morale, and the fight against desertion. The question of maritime borders was raised, especially in the Mediterranean, where piracy was a constant threat to trade routes, and the Byzantine fleet had to be ready to defend islands and coastlines. The Drungarius of the fleet would report on the condition of the ships, the number of galleys and dromons, and the shortage of timber or experienced sailors for new vessels. The emperor would ask questions, his voice calm but piercing. He would clarify numbers, demand explanations for certain retreats, and inquire about the morale of the troops. You could see him mentally weighing each report, comparing it with previous summaries, assessing risks and opportunities. He was not merely a ruler receiving reports, he was the commander-in-chief. After the tense discussions concerning the security and defence of the vast frontiers, the emperor would leave the Magnora, where the voices of generals and strategists had only recently echoed. Now, a different, no less important duty awaited him: to show himself to the people, to go out into the city to remind the inhabitants of Constantinople who their protector and source of order was. This was not a mere stroll or ordinary movement, but a carefully planned ritual, a demonstration of power, piety, and the invincibility of the empire he led, a symbol of its eternal existence. In the chambers designated for ceremonial outings, several servants and high-ranking dignitaries awaited him. Here, the garments for the public ceremony had already been prepared. This was not everyday attire, but a vestment designed to inspire awe and reverence. The emperor would don the porphyry, a fabric of a deep, almost sacred purple colour, available only to him and his immediate heirs. This colour, a symbol of power and divine election, was not just a dye, but a centuries-old legacy of the Roman emperors, now carried on in Byzantium. On his shoulders rested a cloak embroidered with golden threads and precious stones, each one reflecting the light like a small star. On his head, a diadem studded with pearls and emeralds crowned him, a headpiece more ancient and symbolic than a crown. These regalia were not mere adornments. They were the embodiment of history, the weight of the empire, an unbreakable link to the past, and a hope for the future. Every element of his attire spoke of his unique position, that he was not just a man, but the chosen one of God, the vicar of Christ on earth, his living embodiment on earth. When the emperor was ready, he emerged from the palace accompanied by his closest entourage. In front marched soldiers of the Praetorian Guard, selected for their strength and loyalty, their armour gleaming in the sun, their spears rhythmically striking the pavement. Behind them followed high-ranking officials dressed in ceremonial robes and clergy in richly embroidered vestments, carrying banners and crosses. The gilded frames of icons reflected the light, creating a sense of radiance. This was not just a procession, but a living icon moving through the streets of the capital. The procession's route was known in advance to the citizens. The streets through which the emperor was to pass were cleaned, and on the balconies and in the windows. The sun, having reached its zenith during the emperor's procession, now began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the hippodrome as the crowds dispersed, their minds filled with the echoes of imperial grandeur. But for the emperor, the day's work was far from over. The carefully orchestrated public display was merely a prelude to the evening's diplomatic theatre, a spectacle of power designed not for his own people, but for the representatives of distant realms. As dusk deepened into night, the great palace, which had hummed with the quiet efficiency of administration, now prepared for a different kind of performance, the imperial banquet. This was not a simple meal, but a meticulously choreographed event, a dazzling display of Byzantine wealth, sophistication, and authority, primarily intended to impress, and if necessary, subtly intimidate the foreign envoys who had travelled across vast distances to Constantinople. You would find yourself led as an esteemed guest or a foreign dignitary into the Chrysotriklinos, the golden dining hall, a chamber whose very name promised unparalleled splendour. This hall was a marvel of imperial artistry and engineering, designed to overwhelm the senses and convey an immediate, undeniable sense of the empire's majesty. Its walls shimmered with mosaics of gold tesserae, reflecting the light from countless lamps and candelabra, creating an illusion of boundless space and divine radiance. The air, perhaps still carrying a faint scent of frankincense from the earlier chapel services, was now mingled with the richer, heavier aromas of exotic spices and roasted meats, hinting at the culinary extravagance to come. Every detail, from the intricate patterns on the floor to the vaulted ceilings, contributed to an atmosphere of profound reverence and awe. As you stepped further into the hall, your gaze would inevitably be drawn to the renowned automata, mechanical wonders that exemplified Byzantine ingenuity and luxury. A golden plane tree, crafted with exquisite, precise detail, stood proudly in the centre, its branches adorned with golden birds. These were no ordinary sculptures. At a signal, they would burst into lifelike song, their metallic chirps and trills echoing through the vast space, a testament to engineering prowess that bordered on magic. Nearby, golden lions, seemingly poised to spring, would suddenly stir, raising their heads and letting out mechanical roars that filled the hall, a startling and powerful sound intended to evoke awe and perhaps a touch of fear in the uninitiated. These were not mere decorations. They were silent, yet potent. Declarations of an empire that commanded not only armies and vast territories, but also the very laws of nature, or at least appeared to. Such technological marvels served as a clear message of Byzantine superiority. Around the grand table, crafted from polished wood and perhaps inlaid with precious stones, sat the assembled guests. Foreign envoys, distinguished by their varied attires and the distinct languages they spoke, would be seated according to a strict protocol, reflecting their nation's standing in the Byzantine hierarchy. There might be a Frankish ambassador, perhaps from the burgeoning Carolingian Empire, still grappling with the sophisticated diplomacy of the East. Next to him, a representative from the Abbasid Caliphate, a learned scholar or a seasoned diplomat, accustomed to the intricacies of courtly life, but perhaps still taken aback by the sheer opulence of Constantinople. Perhaps even an envoy from the Rus, the northern traders and warriors, whose eyes might widen at the sight of such wealth, a stark contrast to their simpler courts. Beside these foreign guests sat the highest-ranking Byzantine officials, the logothetes, the chief ministers responsible for various departments of state, the strategos, the military governors of themes, the empire's administrative and military districts, and the Patriarch of Constantinople, the spiritual leader, whose presence underscored the emperor's divinely ordained authority. The emperor himself, now divested of his heavy processional robes, would be clad in garments of equally rich but perhaps less formal silk, embroidered with pearls and gems that caught the light with every subtle movement. He would be seated at the head of the table, often on the famed throne of Solomon, a mechanical marvel in itself that could be raised or lowered, literally elevating or diminishing his stature at will, a subtle yet powerful visual cue of his supreme authority. His demeanour, though approachable, would retain an aura of imperial majesty, a quiet strength that needed no overt display. He would engage in brief, formal conversations, often conducted through a network of skilled interpreters who stood ready to bridge the linguistic divides. His questions would be precise, his observations keen, and his responses carefully weighed, each word carrying the immense weight of the empire. He embodied the very essence of imperial power. The meal itself was a testament to abundance and imperial generosity. Course after course of roasted game, exotic fruits, and finely prepared delicacies would be presented on platters of gold and silver, carried by silent, deferential eunuchs. The finest wines imported from distant provinces or produced in the imperial vineyards flowed freely, yet the true purpose of the banquet transcended mere sustenance. It was a stage for subtle diplomacy. As you observed, the emperor might inquire about the health of a distant ruler, a seemingly innocuous question that could subtly convey a message of alliance or a veiled warning. He might commend a foreign envoy's master on a recent military success, or gently remind them of a treaty obligation. Gifts would be exchanged, each item meticulously chosen to reflect the power dynamics. A jeweled sword for a warrior king, a theological text for a devout ruler, a bolt of rare silk for a queen. The emperor's gifts, though seemingly generous, were never without purpose, always intended to reinforce his perceived superiority and the empire's boundless resources. Throughout the evening, The atmosphere, while outwardly festive, maintained an underlying current of formality and controlled grandeur. The laughter was polite, the conversations measured. There was a constant awareness of the emperor's presence, an unspoken understanding that every word, every gesture was observed and interpreted. For the foreign envoys, this banquet was an immersive experience, a powerful demonstration of Byzantine might and cultural preeminence. They would leave not only having partaken of a lavish meal, but also deeply impressed by the empire's wealth, its technological prowess, and the emperor's absolute, divinely sanctioned authority. The spectacle served its purpose: to reinforce existing alliances, to deter potential adversaries, and to project an image of an unassailable empire, a beacon of civilization in a world of lesser kingdoms. As the final courses were cleared and the lamps began to dim, the echoes of the golden birds and the mechanical lions would linger in the minds of the guests, a powerful, indelible memory of their encounter with the heart of Byzantium. This was diplomacy conducted on a grand scale, a silent yet resounding declaration that the emperor and the empire he embodied stood as the unparalleled center of the civilized world. As the last foreign envoy bowed deeply and was escorted from the golden dining hall, the grand spectacle, meticulously choreographed for hours, slowly began to dissolve. The echo of distant music faded, the scent of exotic spices and roasted meats began to dissipate, and the hundreds of flickering oil lamps cast long dancing shadows across the now empty tables. The emperor, who had maintained an unwavering visage of serene power and unapproachable majesty throughout the banquet, felt the immense weight of his public persona begin to lift. His body, stiff from hours of sitting upright on the throne, yearned for the quiet release of his private chambers. He exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible nod with his most trusted eunuch, a silent command for his personal retinue to prepare for his retreat. His journey from the public splendor of the dining hall to the intimate quiet of his private apartments was a transition through diminishing circles of courtly attendance. First, the high-ranking officials and generals offered their final respectful salutations. Then the lesser dignitaries, until only a handful of personal attendants remained. He passed through richly adorned corridors, the vibrant mosaics on the walls seeming to absorb the last vestiges of the day's clamour, their intricate patterns now appearing softer, less imposing in the quiet. As the heavy doors to his private apartments finally closed, the last echoes of the courtly bustle faded into a profound silence. You were now truly alone. The weight of the imperial purple, though shed with the outer robes, still a palpable presence in the air around you. The vast great palace, which had hummed with activity throughout the day, now settled into its nocturnal rhythm. Distant sounds, once drowned out by conversation and ceremony, now became perceptible. The soft rustle of silk as a servant moved through a faraway corridor, the faint chime of a clock marking the passage of time, the gentle lapping of the Bosphorus against the palace walls, a constant ancient lullaby. The air within your chambers, cooled by the evening breeze filtering through high arched windows, carried the faint scent of beeswax and old stone, a comforting, familiar aroma that spoke of true permanence and enduring power. This was your sanctuary, a place where the emperor could, for a few precious hours, simply be a man. Yet even here, surrounded by the quietude of your personal space, the empire never truly slept. beyond these thick walls, the vigilant heart of Constantinople continued to beat with a steady, watchful pulse. Throughout the labyrinthine corridors and courtyards of the great palace, the imperial guard maintained its tireless vigil. The Varangian Guard, formidable warriors drawn from distant lands, their axes gleaming even in the dim torchlight, patrolled the outer perimeters, their measured footsteps echoing softly on the marble floors, a rhythmic reassurance of their presence. Deeper within, the excubitors, the palace guards proper, stood sentry at every critical juncture, their eyes sharp, their senses attuned to the slightest disturbance, their spears held at the ready. You knew that at every gate, along every wall, and within every tower, men stood ready, their lives dedicated to the protection of the sacred imperial household and, by extension, the empire itself. Their duty was not merely to guard against external threats. They were the shield against internal intrigue, the silent guarantors of order and stability. Their unwavering loyalty, often forged through generations of service, was a cornerstone of your reign, a testament to the intricate web of trust and authority that held a vast Byzantine state together. The subtle creak of armour, the soft clink of a blade, the occasional hushed command. These were the unseen, unheard sounds of an empire safeguarding its sleep, a silent symphony of vigilance that underscored the preciousness of peace. As you prepared for rest, the day's events replayed themselves in your mind, not as a jumble of tasks, but as a carefully woven tapestry of duty and decision. The weight of the crown, though physically absent, pressed upon your spirit. You had listened to petitions, judged disputes, ratified laws, and strategized with your generals. Each decision, no matter how small it seemed in the moment, carried the potential to ripple outwards, affecting countless lives across the sprawling territories of your empire. From the sun-drenched fields of Anatolia to the snow-capped mountains of the Balkans. From the bustling markets of Antioch, a vital centre of trade and culture, to the distant shores of Italy, where Roman influence still held sway. You reflected on the faces you had seen today, the hopeful gaze of a petitioner seeking justice, the stern resolve of a general presenting his campaign plans, the calculating politeness of a foreign envoy from a distant kingdom. Each interaction was a thread in the grand design of governance, and you, the emperor, were the weaver, painstakingly creating a pattern of order and strength. You sought not personal glory, but the enduring strength and prosperity of the Roman Empire, a legacy stretching back more than 1,000 years, a beacon of civilization in a turbulent world. Your rule, you believed, was divinely ordained, a sacred trust bestowed upon you by God himself, a responsibility that transcended mere human ambition. This conviction was not a source of arrogance, but of immense, almost overwhelming responsibility. It meant that every challenge, every crisis, was a test of faith, a trial to be met with unwavering resolve and a clear conscience. You prayed silently, not for ease, but for wisdom, for strength to bear the burden, for clarity in the face of uncertainty that always shadowed the imperial throne. The empire was not merely a collection of lands and peoples, it was a living entity, its fate inextricably linked to your own, a vast organism whose health depended on your constant vigilance. You considered the threats that constantly loomed, barbarian incursions on the borders, internal dissent that always simmered beneath the surface, the ever-present danger of plague or famine, the political machinations of rival powers. Yet amidst these anxieties, there was also a profound sense of purpose, a deep satisfaction in the knowledge that you stood as the protector of this ancient inheritance, to protect, to preserve, to guide. This was your calling, a destiny you embraced with every fibre of your being. The last flickering oil lamps cast long dancing shadows on the walls, transforming familiar objects into silent, watchful presences. You moved with a quiet dignity, performing the simple rituals of preparing for sleep. The day's grandeur and the evening's formality had given way to a profound simplicity, a stark contrast to the ceremonial demands that defined your public life. The imperial bed, though richly adorned with fine silks and intricate embroidery, offered not luxury, but a brief, essential respite from the relentless demands of your station. As you finally lay down, the sounds of the palace faded even further, replaced by the soft rhythm of your own breathing. The vastness of your domain, the myriad lives dependent on your vigilance, the intricate dance of diplomacy and warfare. All these thoughts swirled within your mind, a complex tapestry of hopes and fears, triumphs and unspoken anxieties. Yet, as sleep began to draw you in, there was also a sense of peace, a deep, quiet satisfaction that came from having fulfilled your sacred duty for another day. For tonight you had done your part. The palace, the city, and indeed the very empire would sleep under your watchful care, a silent testament to the burden and the enduring legacy of the Byzantine Emperor. The night was a temporary truce, a brief interlude before the dawn would once again bring its demands, its challenges, and its unending opportunities to lead. And you, the Emperor, would awaken once more to meet them, ready to guide your ancient empire through another day, knowing that the eternal flame of Rome, now Byzantium, continued to burn brightly under your unwavering stewardship.